right, welcome to a special Where Are We Now episode of Ins Division. Well, where are we? I know where I am. Do you know where you are? Actually, you probably do. And our guest is here to talk about that. It's Hiawatha Bray. He's a technology writer for the Boston Globe, and his new book is You Are Here, From the Compass to the GPS, The History and Future of How We Find Ourselves. Welcome, Hiawatha. How do you find yourself today?
Oh, no problem at all. I mean, I just get in the car and it's almost automatic. I drive straight to the Boston Globe. I find myself in very good form, very good spirits, and ready to talk about one of the greatest books of our time.
Absolutely. So,
All right.
in the old days, people used to navigate by the sun, the stars, the flight of birds, even as you say, with the Polynesians, the shape of the waves in the ocean. And the truth is, once you got off of familiar terrain, you were never entirely sure exactly where you were. Nowadays, we have GPS, and you know exactly where you are, and that turns out to change a lot of things. Do we live in a world now where it's almost impossible to get lost?
Well, in all fairness, yes, it is. Although there are two issues there. There's whether or not you can get lost and whether or not people can lose you. And those are two of the things that I deal with in the book. You can only get lost nowadays if you almost make an effort. And the classic example of that is what we are now seeing in this appalling and amazing story of the Malaysian airliner. It just seems as though it's almost unbelievable that a modern jetliner could disappear in that way. But it turns out that even though the technology was readily available to avoid this kind of problem, nobody chose to use it. It's interesting because what happened was they basically said we would have to pay extra for a feature on our plane that would automatically ping a satellite and tell it, here's where we are, here's how fast we're moving, and here's the direction we're going. All of that technology is built into the plane. Activating it would cost money. And they're saying, wait a minute, how often does a plane disappear? How likely is it that we wouldn't have a chance to get off a radio message? There's no point paying this extra. We'll just, we'll rely on our other features. We'll rely on the reliability of the airplane. We don't need to have this kind of extra safety margin. I think that's about to change. This month, the International Civil Aviation Organization is having a special meeting. I think it's in Montreal, and they're going to be considering this very question. What regulations are we going to change? And I wouldn't be surprised if we see some new regulation that says if you're flying long distances over water, you got to ping a satellite every half hour and tell them where you are. I think that's going to be what we're going to be doing soon.
Well, it's really amazing how much this all goes beyond just maps. I mean, I remember over 20 years ago, I was talking to a friend of mine who I think then was working at the Department of Defense about civilian applications of GPS, which was just coming in then. And he pointed out that if every plane knows where it is, and how, including its altitude and everything else, and talks to every other plane, you don't need radar. All the work that's traditionally done by radar is done there. And does this go beyond planes to things like cars?
Oh, it's a perfectly good point. And that's exactly the kind of thing we have to start thinking about. Although, it's weird. The FAA has been working on something like this. The concept, I believe, is called free flight. They've been working on it for decades now, and they still have not managed to integrate it into the full air traffic control system. You are quite right. In principle, we should have an air traffic control system where the planes would simply keep track of each other and know where everything is. But they've spent billions of dollars on it and still haven't been able to get it to work. And it makes me a little nervous about the future of the self-driving car, because the same principle applies there as well. Although from what I'm seeing, they're making a lot more progress there. I think it's partly because of cellular technology. If you put a cell phone in every car, or at least a cellular data modem in every car, the technology exists right there to make it much easier to track the location of every car and have each car talking to all the other cars and knowing where every vehicle on the road is. And that's going to be vital for self-driving cars. And from what we're seeing, we're going to see that happen in the next decade or so, almost certainly. It's going to just completely transform the taxi industry. You know what it's going to do? It's going to wipe out the truck driver. Truck drivers are going to be gone because that's going to be the first thing they automate. Long-haul trucks are going to be automatic. Yeah, Red Sovine and all those people who used to write those songs. The old trucker songs like Phantom 309 and all those country songs, forget about it.
C.W. McCall, the whole thing. Well, one reason why it's working better with cars, I think, is the FAA has just got a history of software debacles. And they're just apparently not able to bring a project forward. It's amazing today that I could go to a strange city, large or small, and know where I am. I have in my phone, I've got Navigon or Google Maps or whatever. I can find all the restaurants around me with Yelp or Urban Spoon or something like that. And it's actually, it's a huge change. I mean, I noticed people used to be good at giving directions to their house and tell you what to look for. Now they just give you the address, you plug it in, you find it. Are people going to lose their ability to actually navigate without artificial assistance?
I'm not so sure about that, but certainly it's going to deteriorate somewhat. Although I just heard there's a company, there's a startup here in the Boston area that's just launched that is going to try to use a combination of GPS and local anecdotal knowledge. And you will have this app on your phone, and you'll be driving down the street, and you will get a mention from a human being saying, "Oh, by the way, if you get to this corner, you'll notice there's this big pile of I don't know, abandoned cars sitting here. That's how you'll know you're in the right neighborhood." Or you'll notice graffiti over on this building over here. They are going to combine GPS information with real world anecdotes from human beings who live in the area. And that's a startup that may be getting some venture funding here in the Boston area very soon. So I don't think people are going to completely give up their involvement. In fact, we know they're not going to give up their involvement in navigation, because I just came from a meetup where people were working on this technology. I'm sure you've heard of it, called OpenStreetMap. OpenStreetMap is the world's first map of the world made by ordinary people. Everyday ordinary people with GPS devices, pencils, and papers go out into the world and record everything around them and add it to the map of the world. This has now gotten about 1 million people worldwide involved in it, with about 350,000 actively participating. And they go to every corner of the world and create maps. And major corporations are now using this map instead of stuff like Google Maps because it's free. Anybody can use it and do whatever they want with it. It's all free. It's like the Wikipedia of maps.
I love that. I love that. Well, what about the privacy issues? I know there's been some talk of replacing the gas tax with a mileage tax that uses GPS tracking on your cars. But if your car's tracked and there's a database, they know where you are. And it's not just they know where you are, they can know everywhere you go, and you have gone for years and years, and do all kinds of data mining on that to find out who your friends are and who their friends are and stuff. Should we be worried about that?
I'd be worried. I'm worried like crazy about it. What worries me isn't even the technology. What worries me is what legal restrictions are going to be placed on the use of the technology. I mean, for example, the idea of putting black boxes in cars, which is now going to be mandatory. What is it, 2018? All our cars are going to have black boxes, so you'll know exactly where they've been and how they were being driven at that time. It's a great idea for improving automotive safety and efficiency. But how much access to that do we want the government to have? How much access do we want private businesses to have? We are going to have to set up very strict regulations of some kind before we allow this to happen. And don't get me started about this kind of mileage tax thing. I mean, that's really frightening, because I'm not really sure I trust the government to have that much knowledge about my movements. It's getting a little disturbing to me. That it may not worry you, but it certainly worries me.
Well, it certainly does worry me, as a matter of fact. What sort of laws would you like to see to protect privacy in these kind of areas?
Well, I think basically just what you need is some kind of regulation that says you can't get at this kind of detailed information about people without a full-fledged probable cause search warrant. You can't just say, well, it might be of some interest to us, so let us root around in somebody's location data for their cell phone, for example. It wasn't a problem. People say, well, this has been legal for decades, but it wasn't a problem when you were looking at a few days worth or a few weeks worth, even maybe, of information. What happens if you can look at years worth of a person's locational information, which is what you get with a cell phone now? Or if you could do that with cars, like these license plate scanners that police departments are using, where they can collect years worth of the traffic patterns of every car in a community. If they've got years worth of information, in effect, it's like retroactively following you around. They can put a tail on you for years at a time retroactively without a warrant? I don't think so. As soon as you get to the big data world in which this kind of information is stored for long periods of time, that's when you have to start saying no. You can't just you can't take a large sample and say, we're going to look at everything you've been doing and everywhere you've been going, unless you've got a probable cause warrant. Reason to believe this person has done something wrong.
Well, it's going to raise a lot of issues, and it's certainly something that people are going to have to talk about. I do see people, talking a lot about what the courts are going to do, but there's no reason to wait for the courts. People should be getting Congress to take some action now. And speaking of action, last question, well, what's the next thing you're planning to do?
What's the next thing? Well, I don't know. I got to go write a story here. I'm thinking my next book may end up being on the subject of bandwidth, because as you can see, all around the world, one of the most important determinants of economic growth right now is our access to data bandwidth on the internet and in our global networks. And the fight for bandwidth and who's going to make a fortune off of it may turn out to be one of the most important determinants of success over the next 50 years or so. I mean, just right now, we've noticed, Google did this fiber thing, and now all of a sudden, AT&T and now Cox Cable are all talking about the idea that maybe we need to bring gigabit fiber throughout the United States because people are really going to need that bandwidth. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is wiring itself up like crazy, and other parts of the world that are not doing it are experiencing economic consequences as a result. I'm thinking that might be my next project.
You know, it sounds interesting to me, and I sure appreciate you talking about your current project with us here today.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And that was Hiawatha Bray. He's the author of You Are Here, From the Compass to the GPS, The History and Future of How We Find Ourselves, and he's a technology writer at the Boston Globe. Glad you were able to find your way here to InstaVision. We'll be back soon. In the meantime, have fun on the internet. Thanks.